There's something I've noticed. The women who say they don't know what they're called to do usually already carry the seeds of it. They just don't recognize it. If you watch my last video, the one about what to do when you don't know what to do with your life, then you know we started with identity. Because before you figure out your direction, you have to be grounded in who God says you are. And if you haven't watched that yet, pause this and go back to it. This one will land differently once you do. But this isn't about searching for something new. It's about noticing what's already there. Some of you have been asking God, show me my purpose, reveal my calling, tell me what I'm supposed to be doing. And the Holy Spirit is quietly saying, I've been forming you this whole time, not in a dramatic way, not with neon lights, but in your character, in your experiences, in what you've survived, and what people always come to you for, even in what you're afraid of. And because it feels, normal to you, you've just dismissed it. You think that you had something significant in you. You'd feel more confident, more certain, more sure, but that's not usually how it works. So today I want to help you see something, not hype you, not rush you, not assign you a label, just help you recognize what God may already be shaping right where you are. One of the biggest reasons you don't recognize what's in you is because it feels normal. It doesn't feel extraordinary. It doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't feel anointed. It just feels like you. And that's usually where we miss it. You think that God, placed something powerful in you. If he did, then it would come with fireworks, confidence, applause, certainty. But most of the time, what he places in you develops quietly. It develops in responsibility, in hardship, in showing up and surviving. And some of you become strong because you had to be. You became discerning because you were hurt before. You became wise because you had to learn lessons the hard way. You became organized because chaos exhausted you. And because those traits formed through pressure, you don't see them as gifts. You see them as coping. But what if God is forming capacity? Moses didn't see leadership in himself. He saw a speech problem. He told God, I'm not eloquent. And God didn't argue with him about his weakness. He redirected his focus. So what is that in your hand? That's what he said. What is that in your hand? And Moses was looking at what he lacked. And God was pointing to what he already carried. And some of you are doing the same thing. You're focused on what you haven't accomplished, what you're not confident in, what you don't have yet. Meanwhile, God is saying, look at what's already in your hand. Another reason you don't see it, because it came easily. If people always came to you for advice, you think that's nothing. I just listen. If you can sense when something is off, you think that's just intuition. If you can break down complicated things and make them simple, you think, oh, everybody can do that. No, everybody cannot. That's why we have teachers and scholars. But because, it doesn't strain you, you undervalue it. And then comparison makes it worse. You see someone else's platform, someone else's title, and someone else's clarity, and you assume that your quiet strengths don't matter. But the Bible shows us over and over that God builds privately before he reveals publicly. David was tending sheep before he ever had a crown. Esther was developing composure before she held influence. And Joseph, he was managing a prison before he managed a nation. So none of that felt glamorous. It felt ordinary, routine, hidden. But hidden doesn't mean insignificant. Sometimes the reasons you don't see what's in you is because you've only been measuring visibility. God measures the formation in you. And, formation, it doesn't look like it's always impressive. It often looks like endurance, consistency, patience, restraint, discernment. And those things don't trend, but they carry weight. They would carry weight in the kingdom. So before you say, I don't know what's in me, pause, because you might not be empty. You might be just overlooking. So let me take this a step further. So some of you are looking for purpose in titles, but God often hides in temperament, the way you think, the way you respond, the way you carry responsibility, the way you handle people. Those things are not random. They're not random, and they're not like random personality quirks either. They're clues. So, for example, are you the one who feels deeply for people? You can't ignore injustice. You notice when someone is left out. You feel stirred when someone is overlooked. I was always a shy person. I still am. But because of it, I observe people and my surroundings. And this led me to see the gifts in the heart of people who are often overlooked. And I think it's me recognizing parts of myself and the ones that are quiet and, they tend to stay to themselves. And many may describe them as weird or awkward. And I'm sure I've been described as such. But that seeing is not being sensitive. That may be, compassion that's wired for impact. Or, maybe you're the steady one. You don't panic easily. When everyone else is spiraling, you are calm. You can make decisions under pressure. And that's not just personality, that's capacity. And some of you are strategic without trying. You naturally see how things connect. You organize chaos in your mind. You spot problems before they escalate. And that's not overthinking, that's insight. And sometimes we minimize what's natural to us because it doesn't feel spiritual. It doesn't feel spiritual enough. But the Bible shows us that God uses temperament. In Romans 12, Paul talks about the functions in one body. Some lead, some encourage, some give, some show mercy. And he doesn't say, wait until you feel extraordinary. It says, use what you've been given, not what you wish you had, not what looks impressive, but what you've been given. Even Proverbs 31, which is often reduced to domestic virtue, it actually describes a woman who is perceptive, strategic, wise in business, discerning in speech, and strong in leadership. Her character is her influence. Sometimes we are waiting for an assignment when God has been developing disposition. And disposition, it determines durability. So let me say that clearly. The kind of woman that you're becoming matters more than the platform that you're chasing. Maybe all of you are not chasing a platform, but some of you are in some capacity. Because you see, platforms can elevate you faster than your character can sustain you. And many women in their 30s and 40s are frustrated, not because they lack ability, but because they haven't recognized how much formation has already happened. So you've endured things that built strength. You've navigated spaces that required wisdom. You've held relationships that require maturity. You survived seasons that demanded resilience. That didn't just happen. God was shaping something. Ephesians 2:10 says that we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand. Workmanship, y'all. That means intentional design, not accident, not leftover pieces. You are not a random collection of experiences and traits. You are formed. And the way you think, the way you carry yourself, the things that move you, the burdens that you notice, those are often early indicators of God, what God may be inviting you toward. So before assignment comes recognition, and before recognition comes humility. Humility to say, maybe I've underestimated what God has already built in me. So let's talk about something deeper. Not just who you are, but what you've lived. Because sometimes the clearest clues aren't in your strengths. They're in your story. The job that you thought was temporary, the responsibility you didn't ask for, the season that stretched you, the relationship that broke you, the move that scared you, the leadership role that fell in your lap, the financial pressure that forced you to learn discipline. You thought those were interruptions, but what if they were training? Joseph said to his brothers in Genesis 50:20 that you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. That doesn't mean that the pain was good. It means that God knew how to use it. And some of you have walked through things that you never would have chosen. But look at what they produced. You learned boundaries. You learned discernment. You learned how to rebuild. You learned how to lead quietly. You learned how to manage. You learned how to endure. Those lessons didn't just happen for survival. They formed capacity. Romans 8:28 says God works all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. All things. That includes the confusing job, the delayed marriage, the failed attempt, the business idea that didn't take off, the church hurt, ooh, the betrayal, the waiting. Sometimes you're asking God, what is my purpose? And he's saying, look what I have already walked you through. What burdens do you understand deeply? Not theoretically, personally. What problems do you notice that other people overlook? What pain in others that makes you lean in instead of look away? Those aren't random emotional reactions. They are often indicators. 2 Corinthians 1:4 says that God comforts us so that we can comfort others when they need it, essentially. And that means that your healing has direction. Your survival has direction. Your experience has direction. And sometimes the reason you feel unsettled is because what you've walked through is meant to serve someone else someday. Not necessarily on a stage, not necessarily in a business, not necessarily in something public, but in some form. We have to accept that. God rarely wastes formation. Even Jesus spent 30 years in obscurity before 3 years of ministry. 30 years, quiet, unknown, working, and nothing was wasted. So before you dismiss your story as ordinary, pause. There may be many threads running through your life that are more connected than you think. And recognizing them isn't about pressure. It's about awareness. So let's talk about something that most people don't connect to purpose. And that's fear. Not all fear, but the kind that keeps showing up around the same themes. Some of you aren't confused about your life. You're afraid of what it might require. And there's a difference. You say you don't know what to do, but when you get quiet, there are certain directions that come up, and immediately the body tightens visibly. So leadership, right? Starting something, speaking up, changing environments, leaving what's familiar, outgrowing certain relationships. And you tell yourself, that's not for me. But sometimes that reaction is not proof that it's wrong. It's proof that it matters. Jeremiah said, I am too young. And God didn't say you're right. He said, do not say I am too young. Translation, stop disqualifying yourself. As for how Esther, she had to risk her safety to approach the king. If she stayed quiet, she would remain safe. If she stepped forward, she could lose everything. Fear was present, but so was calling. And I want to be careful here too, because not every fear means run toward it. Sometimes fear is wisdom, and sometimes it's discernment. But sometimes fear is the edge of growth. If you consistently feel intimidated by something, not because it's sinful, not because it's foolish, but because it would stretch you, that's worth noticing. You say, like, I don't see myself leading, but people already follow your advice. You say, I don't want attention, but when you speak, people listen. This was me. I told you earlier that I've always been shy. I wanted to be in the background. I was fearful to step out and be seen. So I used to avoid, applying to jobs that would involve public speaking or being in the forefront. Oh, but God. But once I pressed in and put God's word to the test, that I could do all things in Christ who strengthens me, I put myself out there. And I've been working on a job that requires me to speak or present information. And this job has blessed me to make over 6 figures. And I don't say that to brag, but some of you desire to make 6 figures. And God is saying, put my word to the test and leave fear behind. Okay, so back to what some of you are saying about yourself. So some of you say, I'm not creative, but you constantly imagine, better systems, better environments, better ideas. Fear has a way of exaggerating risk and minimizing capacity. 2 Timothy 1:7 says that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. Fear, it can feel loud, but it's not your identity. And here's something else. Sometimes the reason you don't recognize what's in you is because you learned early to shrink it. Maybe you were the outspoken one and you were told to quiet down, pipe it down, you're doing too much. Maybe you were, ambitious and someone made you feel selfish. Maybe you were imaginative and someone called you unrealistic. So now you suppress the very thing that makes you distinct, not because it's wrong, but because it once felt unsafe. And if that's the case, confusion may not be the problem. Healing might be. Some of you don't need more information. You need permission. Permission to admit what stirs you. Permission to acknowledge what feels too big. Permission to stop pretending you don't care. Fear is not always the enemy, but unexamined fear, that can keep you small. And staying small will always feel misaligned with who you were created to be. So instead of asking, well, what am I called to do? Maybe also ask, what have I been afraid to admit? Because sometimes resistance is sitting right next to your invitation. So let me ask you something honestly. When you picture the life that you wish you were living, what does it look like? Not the Instagram version, not what sounds impressive in conversation, but the one you imagine when you're alone. More freedom, more creativity, more flexibility, more peace, more impact, time, more depth in your relationships. Some of you won't even let yourself dream anymore because it feels irresponsible or unrealistic or selfish, especially in your 30s and 40s. You tell yourself, I should be grateful, right? I should be content. And this is just how life is, contentment is biblical. But resignation is not. Psalms 37:4 says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. That doesn't mean that he fulfills every whim, but it does mean desire, and desire are not enemies. God does not randomly wire longing into you. Now, we must hold this carefully, okay? Desire must be surrendered, not demanded, but surrendered. Desire is often directional. If you long for freedom, it may be because you are wired for stewardship in a different structure. If you long for deep connection, it may be because you are wired for relational influence. If you long for creative expression, it may be because God formed imagination in you for a reason. If you long for financial stability, it may not be greed. It may be capacity to manage and multiply. Many women silence their desires because they fear becoming self-focused. But desire surrendered to God becomes alignment with design. James 1:17 says, every good and perfect gift is from above, and that includes what he placed inside you. And sometimes that includes what he stirs inside you. Now, here's the important part. Longing without peace becomes striving. And that's when anxiety enters, comparison enters, pressure enters. And, some of you don't feel free enough to dream because you are still gripping something tightly, still trying to control timing, still trying to force clarity, still trying to solve everything at once. I'm guilty of this, okay? I know it too well. But sometimes before God clarifies direction, he calms your grip. You can't see clearly when you are clenched. Peace makes room for vision. And if you don't know what you want, it may not be because you lack purpose. It may be because you lack a rest. And when you begin to let go of control, comparison, and panic, space opens, not for fantasy, but for possibility. The life that you quietly long for may not be random. It may be a signpost, not the full picture, but a direction. And recognizing that doesn't mean you run tomorrow. It means you start paying attention. So here's what I want you to take from this. You are not empty, you are not behind, and you are not starting from scratch. Before you ever figured out a title, before you labeled your calling, before you built anything public, God was already building something in you and in your character and your experiences and what you survived and what you notice and what stirs you, even in what intimidates you. And maybe the reason you feel unsettled is not because you lack purpose, but because something in you is ready to be acknowledged, not forced, not rushed, not announced, just acknowledged. You don't need to have a full blueprint right now, but you do need awareness of what's already there, awareness of what God has been forming, awareness of what you've been minimizing. And if you're listening today and you started to see patterns, threads running through your life, but you're still unsure how they connect, that's exactly why I created my free training. It's called Waiting Well, the 3 belief shifts that move you out of delay and into your divine delivery, that thing you've been praying for. So, because sometimes it's not about discovering something new, it's about just shifting how you see yourself. And in that training, I walk through the belief shifts, the belief shifts, to help you move from confusion to clarity, from striving to trust, from feeling behind to recognizing you're being built. So if you're in a season where you feel formed, but not yet fully released, that training will help you to understand what's happening. The link is below in the description section. So take it when you're ready. And before you go, I want you to sit with one question. What have I been overlooking about myself? Not what do I need to add, not what do I need to become, not what certification do I need. What has God already been forming? You may not see the full picture yet, but you are not as far from clarity as you think. I'll see you in the next video, Royal Ones. God bless you.